Tom Watt is a sports journalist, broadcaster and author of new book, A Beautiful Game. The book features interviews with world-class football players about their childhoods and the role football has played in their lives. And for every book sold, a donation will be made to UNICEF's sport-related projects. So first of all, where did the idea to write the book come from?
The idea for writing it actually came out of another project. I've been involved for quite a long while in the community department at Arsenal Football Club. You do marvellous work in London, but also actually all around the world. And I've been working on a literacy project with them, which resulted in some books which are out now and are being used in schools now. There's a guy called Alan Sefton who runs the community department at Arsenal, who's one of my great heroes in football, heroes in life, to be perfectly honest. And we were out kind of celebrating that these books had happened and that they had been published and one thing and another. And we just got talking, as you do. And we were actually talking about the schools that Arsenal work in London. And a lot of the schools, because there are so many different kind of ethnic groups and, different religious backgrounds represented in the London schools, that a lot of those schools run kind of inclusion weeks and stuff, where you look to kind of celebrate difference but also celebrate what brings people together. And Alan was saying, wouldn't it be great if there was a kind of educational resource that did that? And I thought, well, what's the one place that's as diverse as a secondary school classroom in Tower Hamlets? A Premier League dressing room, actually. And that's where the idea came from, basically. It was just, obviously, every footballer has been a kid. And to talk to people who are up there as, heroes about their childhoods and their experience of childhood, where they grew up, their friends, their family, their school life, and most importantly of all, the kind of the thing that they loved more than anything, that's the one thing that binds all the people together, is the love of football.
Did you speak to any school children to find out what they'd like to know about their idols?
No, I've got a 10-year-old, so I'm in touch with my 10-year-old side. No, and, that's the whole thing about football is it's an excuse for apparently grown men to get in touch with the excitement and the kind of the passions of when they were kids, But they are absolutely, kids in schools are absolutely who I hope will get a chance to look at this book. There's a book actually that UNICEF, when I was thinking about the book, and I mention it because it was a book that was done in conjunction with UNICEF called Children Like Me, about childhood around the world. Nothing to do with football, but or incidentally to do with football, but by and large not. But I loved that book because I bought it for my little boy, and he started looking at that book when he was maybe 3. We'd look at the pictures together. He might ask questions about some of the pictures. And as the years have gone by, the way he connects with that book has changed as he's grown up. He's now 10, and he still reads that book. But obviously now he can read all the text for himself. He will have his own ideas. He will make his own connections about it. So he'll look at that book and use it in a completely different way now to how he did when he was a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old. But that, for a book to kind of go with you through childhood in that way, I think is a wonderful thing. And very much the idea, I mean, obviously the book is for grown-ups too, but I think that because the book is beautiful to look at and so sort of heavily illustrated, I would hope that, kids will connect with it in the way that my son connected with that, that book that was done in cooperation with UNICEF, Children Like Me.
And why did you decide to support UNICEF with this book?
There are sort of two answers to that question, really. The connection of what the book's about and UNICEF's work, I think it's a match with great integrity. Do you know what I mean? I think that what the book obviously is about childhood. It's about football, but it's about childhood as well. And specifically, and I go back to this guy Alan Sefton, who in a previous book I wrote, the last line of the book was a quote from him, which said, "Everything I've done in my life, professional life," he meant, he's running a community department at a major football club, he said, is because of my belief that football can be a force for good in people's lives. And I think that message about sport connects with the work that Unicef does, very specifically with the Sport for Development projects, but more generally, you know, it's the right connection. It's the right connection for the book, certainly. I hope it's the right connection for UNICEF as well. You know, and some of the backgrounds of the players that are in the book are, you know, these are not all kids who've been, you know, driven by a car to a nice manicured training pitch somewhere, and you know, there are some very, very tough backgrounds indeed. And the point is that for them, football has been what transformed their lives. But the really important thing, and without it, UNICEF wouldn't exist, is the belief that lives can be transformed. You know what I mean? That you don't just sit there and go, that's tough, isn't it? You know what I mean? That you actually can make a difference. The other why is more of a how, really, which is that, as I say, I thought about the idea for the book originally just as something that would be used in schools in this country. But I have a kind of long-standing professional relationship with David Beckham, having worked with him on his autobiography. And we were talking about this idea, and I was saying that, you know, perhaps David would like to be the English player represented, because it's 40 different players from 40 different countries in the book, or maybe do an introduction or something. And it was actually that conversation, David made that connection, and so gave me the introduction to UNICEF. David made that connection with UNICEF, obviously, because he's been involved for some time, and it is something that really matters to him. And he just immediately said, well, there's a connection here, and we made that connection work.
The book's divided into sections. There's friendship, family, dedication, courage. Did you plan to focus on these themes, or did it just sort of grow organically?
Organic is one way of putting it. I'll be honest with you, I think when you actually go through the text, you'll find that most of those themes, you could have picked most of the stories to represent them. It does reflect the fact, one of the great things, and I'm sure kind of if you talk to people who've worked in the field for UNICEF in different areas of the world, they'd say the same thing. One of the great things is that you talk to a guy from Japan, guy from, you know, Nigeria, a guy from Mexico. It's completely different. The background's completely different. But there will be things that connect with all of them. Football, but other things too. You know, the quality of friendship, relationships inside family, the place of, you know, school in your life, and the importance that's given to it by your family, by your community and stuff. And so to be able to sort of say, look, these people, all these players are from such different backgrounds, but there are themes that weave through. And there'll be themes that weave through, maybe not all 40, but you'll read one story and then you read the next one and you see there's a connection with the one that's gone before, and then the next one makes a connection with the one that went before it, which is different from the one. You get what I mean? There are sort of connections that you couldn't possibly foresee until you start putting the stories alongside each other.
One of the main things that came across in all the stories was just the level of dedication of players who reach that top level. Do you have any favourite stories of how young boys have overcome whatever obstacles are in their way to become top footballers?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe do have kind of favourite stories. I certainly have. Remember, there was a fantastic. It was actually the first interview I did for the book with a guy called Ulysses de la Cruz, who's from Ecuador, and we spent a long time together. He was very interested in the whole kind of. He was interested in the UNICEF connection, and he was just interested in the book generally. And we got talking about football generally, and he was talking about why players play. You know, particularly say in the Premier League here. You know, you look at players and they'll be earning more money in a year than they'll ever be able to spend in the rest of their lives and stuff. And he said, well, I don't get why do players do it. Now, Ulysses has come from a very, very deprived part of Ecuador. It is a country with kind of ethnic tensions between Hispanic background and a kind of indigenous people from a Hispanic background, people from indigenous backgrounds. That's something that has been alleviated to a great extent by the fact that Ecuador have reached World Cup finals now, and they have tended to do that with teams that are based on people from the indigenous population, specifically from this area of Ecuador called the Valle de Chota, which is where Ulysses is from. So we were talking about this wider players, and I asked him the question, and he said, "Why do I play? I play to change the history of my people." Now, I think if you've got that kind of thing in the back of your head, then, you know, now there's an obstacle. There's something to... The great thing is that you're right. There were some, you know, all of the players, I think, talk about obstacles that needed to be overcome. You're right. There is an incredible amount of kind of dedication, commitment, sacrifice, everything that goes. But why? Because they love football. They love football like they love breathing. And that's the message. That's the message. Is that it's that love of the game that transforms lives and transforms the 40 players' lives who are in, you know, are in the book.
That kind of leads on to the last question I was going to ask, which is, why would you say football deserves to be called a beautiful game?
There is that phrase, the beautiful game, that I think Pelé coined. And I think what he meant is that aesthetically, it's obviously the most graceful, the most spontaneous, the simplest, and yet at the same time the most sophisticated game there is. He was talking about it as a sport. Football is a beautiful game because it's the world's game. Everybody in the world plays the game. If you had to pick things that, you know, that a kid in New South Wales and a kid in Estonia and a kid in Chile, what do all those children and their parents have in common? I think you'd probably start the list with football. You would start the list with football, and that alone makes it a beautiful game. That the game's ability to kind of connect people who are otherwise absolutely divided. I don't mean necessarily at war with each other, but absolutely divided in the sense of their experience, their culture, their background, their geography, their history. Football binds them together. When a World Cup final's being played, you know, there are people crouched in front of televisions everywhere on the planet. That is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful game because here are 40 beautiful stories about the way love of a game has transformed 40 people's lives. And they are just examples of how transforms it. Football's transformed my life. It's transformed a lot of people's lives and can transform people's lives. All right, we don't all go on to play for Arsenal, but for all that, it can be a force for good, as my friend Al said, a force for good and a force for transformation in people's lives. And that makes it a beautiful game.
For more information about The Beautiful Game, visit www.unicef.org.uk/beautiful game. This is Mary Whittaker reporting for Unicef UK.